Welcome, everyone. I'm Bea Mittermiller, Transportation Chair at San Diego 350. Thank you for joining our committee this evening for our latest webinar on transportation in San Diego. Just to let you know, we will be recording this presentation. Also, please mute yourselves. Our past webinars have described the importance of reducing vehicle miles traveled in order to meet our regional climate goals, highlighted specific SANDAG and MTS initiatives, and generally raised awareness of issues and opportunities. This time we will focus on mobility options other than automobiles. If you have questions, please enter them in the chat box, but we may run out of time. And I apologize in advance if that's what happens. So San Diego 350 is building a movement to prevent the worst impacts of climate change and climate injustice through education, outreach, public policy, advocacy, and mobilizing people to take action. Our membership strives to create a future that supports a livable planet and a just society. With these guiding principles, we have invited a group of experts to describe their efforts to achieve cleaner, safer, healthier, and more equitable options to get around. Joining us tonight in a panel discussion are Kevin Cox, President of Electra Bicycle, David Lepidus, Managing Director representing Tishman Speyer, Tailgate Park, Alyssa Muto, Director, Mobility Department, and also Interim Director of the Sustainability Department at the City of San Diego, and Pete Shearer, Director representing Hines, Riverwalk. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded land of the Kumeyaay people. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Kumeyaay community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. Next slide. San Diego, like most cities in the US, is dependent on cars for almost all our travel. Next slide. The result is that the single largest contributor of climate warming greenhouse gas emissions in our region, over half, comes from tailpipes. We simply cannot meet our climate goals without a significant reduction in car travel. In addition to emissions, the infrastructure to support cars is extensive and squeezes out other uses like housing, parks, and the ability to bike and walk safely, Estimates suggest that in most US cities, between 40 and 65% of downtown areas are used for streets and parking. Next slide. We are slowly emerging from a global pandemic that has touched every aspect of our lives, including how we get around. We worked from home, we traveled by bike and on foot, we found ways to stay fit without going to a gym, and we used our parks and public spaces to safely social distance and reconnect with nature. We also closed streets to vehicle traffic and found an increased sense of community and support for local business as we shopped and dined outside. In short, we got out of our cars and adapted to the new restrictions. Next slide. 15-minute cities are places where everything you need is within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. Let's take a moment to see what some cities are doing and reimagine San Diego as a 15-minute city. At this point, I would like to turn over the narration to our moderator, San Diego 350 volunteer, Carla Ruiz Velasco. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you, Bea. Hello, everyone. I'm Carla Ruiz Velasco, and I will be the moderator this evening. Thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to our panel. Each panelist comes from a unique vantage point on the subject of mobility, and I will be asking a series of questions on this topic. But first, I will ask each panelist for a brief introduction. Kevin Cox.
Thanks, Carla. Hey, first, I'd like to thank everyone at San Diego 350 for inviting me part of the conversation this evening. I'm looking forward to learning some new things tonight, which should be awesome. Hi, my name is Kevin Cox. I'm actually living the dream as the president of the Electra Bicycle Company. Electra is a lifestyle brand. We have a simple mission of just getting more people on bikes more often. Electra was born in the North County of San Diego, and the brand continues to be committed to our beach heritage and culture. We reimagined and modernized the cruiser bike when we launched the company all the way back in 1993. And in 2003, we invented the comfort category of bikes when we launched a bike that we called the Townie. And now nearly 30 years later, that same bike remains the best-selling bike in America. And as a matter of fact, it's also now the best-selling e-bike in America at all of America's bike shops. It sells more than any other bike by any other brand. Lots of times at Electra, I like to say that we have a pretty relaxed view on just about everything, but we're definitely serious about our bikes. And we're even more serious about how our bikes can help address some of today's toughest issues. Things like global warming, traffic congestion, obesity, just to name a few. So again, listen, I'm super excited to be here, super excited to dive into some interesting topics. And once again, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Now, David Lepidus.
Thanks, Carla. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you to San Diego 350 for extending the invitation to participate in the discussion today. David Lapidus, I'm a managing director at Tishman Speyer. We are a vertically integrated real estate development company, privately held, family-owned business that goes back over 100 years. We're headquartered in New York, but we've got offices all over the United States, in Europe, in Brazil, Asia, and you know, we are very fortunate to have had the opportunity to partner with the San Diego Padres in towards the end of 2019 to pursue the Tailgate Park at East Village Quarter RFP, which is a 7.25 acre site just east of Petco Park that the city of San Diego currently owns, and ran a process to find a developer to acquire and develop over a number of years. In September of 2020, we were awarded the RFP in partnership with the Padres. And you know, really our vision was to develop what's now a surface parking lot, includes about 1,100 parking spaces, into an inclusive and dynamic urban destination, which will include multifamily housing, office, retail, and public space, which all will be connected to a series of mobility options, including the transit center, which is located at the southwest corner of the site. So very excited to be here. Look forward to participating in the discussion.
Wonderful, thank you. And now Alyssa Muto, please.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you so much to Bea and Wendy for reaching out, and to Carla for moderating this panel. I'm just really excited to be part of a conversation about our public spaces and mobility. I am presently the Director of Mobility and recently assumed the Interim Director role of Sustainability in the City of San Diego. I always say, why do one director job when you can do two? What's great about it is there's a lot of overlap and a lot of room for us to do really terrific things in the city of San Diego related to mobility. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of our initiatives and our efforts. And I look forward to your questions as well later on in the panel. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Pete Shearer.
Yeah, thanks for everyone. I'll be brief so we can get to the discussion tonight. But this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and really to the ethos of the company that I work for, Hines. Much like David's company, Hines is a family-owned company, been around for about 70 years now. We're based in Houston, Texas, but everybody that works on San Diego stuff, including the Riverwalk project you see on the screen here, lives and raises our families here in San Diego. So, the topic of, climate change and transit-oriented development is something that I found a passion for long ago. I actually did 6 years in the Navy after graduating undergrad, and that brought me to DC. And DC is a city that does TOD very well. And it was so different than my upbringing in suburban Phoenix. And it really, lit a fire and a passion. And it goes back to Jane Jacobs' quote there, that a neighborhood is not just the built environment, it's the community. And so, I met my wife in the little bar around the corner from the building that I lived in, and we both rode the same train, and that's where we sort of hit it off. And so I wrote my essays to try to go to business school when I was getting out of the military, with the intention of having a career aspiration of building infill transit projects around, transit-oriented development around transit stations on the West Coast where it really needs to be done. And with Riverwalk, I actually have stumbled into the dream job, the dream spot here, where I'm not just building, one infill project. We're actually building the transit-oriented neighborhood. So I'm sure we'll talk about it more tonight, but really happy to be bringing that concept to San Diego, a city that I think is looking that direction and so desperately needs the land use to complement the investment we've made into the infrastructure.
Wonderful, thank you. So now we're going to move on to the first question. We are in a climate emergency. California has mandated aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets to meet or exceed those goals. And now the Biden administration has set a federal goal of 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Active transportation is being embraced as a way to make cities more sustainable and more equitable. Yet, the Climate Action Campaign annual report card gives all San Diego cities an off track for bike, walk, and transit. How do your projects or initiatives increase mobility options in San Diego while reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Pete.
Thanks. So Riverwalk is, as I just was discussing, a project that is really built around this ethos. And at Hines, we've had lots of great discussions about this and how land use plays into this equation. In our minds, the issue of greenhouse gases is not just a mobility question; it's really a land use question. I think the great example of that is the transit system that we have in San Diego. I won't throw shade at any of our neighbors in Mission Valley, but Mission Valley has the framework to be a transit-oriented neighborhood. But you look at the transit stops up and down the valley, and the majority of the projects orient themselves away from transit, right? And so what we aim to do with Riverwalk is to really build the first transit-oriented village. And so not often do you have the ability to have a 200-acre site where you can build 4,000 homes and 100,000 square feet of retail and 1 million square feet of office space. So to take that opportunity, we're going to build a new transit stop in the middle of the site and orient all of the land uses so that the front door experience to the project is the experience you get right when you open the doors to the train. And so you walk right off the train immediately into the action and the energy of the community. So, you know, as I always say, land use is the clothing that goes on the emperor here. We can spend the $2 billion we're spending on the Midcoast trolley, and it's only going to be so effective if you don't add density around transit. So what Alyssa and her team have done to the city is incredible. I think you know, they are really forward thinking and pushing for community plan updates that do exactly that. I think the Mission Valley Community Plan Update is a perfect example of that. So, you know, at Riverwalk, you know, we aim to show that you know, a car-free lifestyle is not only possible, but it's preferable. And this is a lifestyle that I've lived, and some in our office now live here in Southern California. But what it really is, it's not just about mobility options, it's about how you design a city. Do we want to grow out or do we want to grow up? And I think the right answer there is going to be density around transit, growing infill type development like Riverwalk.
Wonderful, thank you. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Pete just described. I think, you know, the sort of DNA of our company has always been that we've been focused on development in, you know, major urban centers, you know, in the US and abroad. You know, in Southern California, we've obviously been a little bit late to that party. It's funny when our colleagues from New York come visit us on the West Coast, and particularly in LA and San Diego, they're always astounded by, you know, the use of cars and the congestion on freeways. And, you know, to them, it's very obvious. You know, our company really grew up in New York, and for folks who've been sort of multi-generationally raised in New York, it's sort of very obvious that, to sort of echo Pete's comment, you know, land use really is sort of the driving force. And, you know, we sort of like to think of urban development as providing connections. You know, you're providing a connection to jobs, you're providing a connection to housing, you're providing a connection to art and culture, to retail, to food, to open space, and really sort of cultivating, you know, diverse and dynamic neighborhoods. And you sort of do that in an efficient way, both from a land use perspective, but also from, you know, a sustainability and environmental perspective, by doing it, you know, with a connection to mobility. And I think what really excited us about, you know, the opportunity here in downtown San Diego is the ability to do just that, and really sort of change the narrative in a place like San Diego that, you know, to date has been very much dependent on cars and, you know, the freeway network, in the same way that other markets in Southern California have been. But really start to you know, provide an experience that, you know, our customers who are, you know, major office tenants, with whom we have relationships with all over the country and all over the world, you know, they're looking for something different and something new and something new, unique to sort of provide to their employees, and being able to do that in an urban format that provides lots of different sort of mobility alternatives, whether it's train or bike, or the ability to walk from your office to your apartment, from your office to dinner, from your office to a Padres game, from your apartment to a farmer's market, or to go play soccer or basketball. You know, sort of mixing all of those things together, we think is really sort of critical to a successful mixed use urban development. And I think that's what excited us so much about this moment in time in San Diego, and then, you know, this particular opportunity within the city. We keep hearing from, again, going back to, you know, my comment about our customers, about this sort of very rich, you know, talent pool in San Diego. And, you know, it's obviously very obvious why. It's an incredible place to live. It offers a, you know, incredible quality of life. There's an incredibly, you know, high level of talent from which, you know, our customers have been recruiting and look forward to continuing to recruit. I think coming out of COVID, as the focus more and more is about sort of health and wellness. And I think the cities that are going to be winners going forward are those that can offer the healthiest balance of health and wellness. So for us, again, that sort of takes us back to what we've historically been, we think pretty good at and hope to be, really good at in San Diego, which is creating that sort of dynamic urban, that sort of connection to all of those things. And it really starts with the, with the transit center, which, relatively soon is going to provide a connection to USD and to the central part of San Diego. That in combination with a mix of uses on site, our project is going to be approximately 2 million square feet of office space and apartments and retail. Being able to sort of provide that at the foot of a light rail station that's going to connect into the larger San Diego metro area, we think is really, really exciting. So
wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Alyssa.
Yeah, so when I think about what I do in my day-to-day, it's really always driven to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and how can we affect change in our planning, our policies, our regulations, but then also in our actions. And that's really the key. We have a climate action plan. It has very ambitious goals for mode share. I know some of your attendees tonight are very familiar with those goals. And we know we need to do better. We need to make more improvements to provide for more mobility choices and options to our residents, to be able to reduce, even the smallest vehicle mile that is traveled by car. If people can be thinking about that and making better decisions, that's just very important for us to be working on, not just in the city, but with our partners here, with SD 350, with our development partners. One of the recent initiatives that the city adopted is the parking reform, and we actually have the phase 2 to that coming forward. In that first phase, it was focused on multifamily residential, and where we had previously set, maybe some would call them arbitrary parking requirements per unit. In our city, we looked and determined that within transit priority areas, within areas like where David and Pete's projects are located, we don't need to set parking requirements. Let the demand drive what is provided. Let people that are looking for homes that are decoupled from a parking spot to be able to select that, to be able to save money, and to provide for housing for people who really truly can't afford a car. And are scrimping and saving just to buy a car to get around the city. So if we can provide that housing, we are expanding the stock to different types of residents at different levels. And that's really important. The other piece of that reform was to require the unbundling of the parking from the purchase or renting of a unit. And then also requiring developments that are actually outside of the downtown area. So David's project wouldn't be required because it's already really rich in transportation amenities that support that shift from the car or the reliance on the car. But projects working their way out from that core urban area would also be required to put in transportation amenities. But those are often what our new renters and buyers are actually looking for. So it's a win-win-win for everybody. And now we're looking at the other side of the trip with our commercial and office parking reform, and we'll be bringing that forward in the next couple months in the city. So hoping to hit the other side to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Great, thank you. And Kevin.
Yeah, I think, listen, those are some really, really great points. And, for us in the bicycle business, it's kind of mute unless people like Peter and David are actually building those connection points within the city. So, we can supply some product, but if people don't have a place that's safe and convenient to ride them, it's absolutely useless. And so in San Diego, we're doing a few things now to kind of jumpstart that. So we support a program called Pedal Ahead. It's spearheaded by a nonprofit called Rider Safety Visibility. The program was launched from a grant from the San Diego Foundation, funded by SDG&E and the Left Coast Fund. It's also supported by San Diego's supervisor, Nathan Fletcher. So it's this kind of multi-pronged program aimed at a few things: at environmental stability, a little healthy living, more active lifestyle, and also building some community around the program. And you can kind of tell from the name, Pedal Ahead, that it's really a program meant to serve as an alternative to automobile transportation through the adoption of electric bikes or e-bikes. So we just launched this pilot program in September. It's centered in San Diego's District 4. And so far, the participants that we've had over just the past, I guess that's maybe 6-7 months, have logged over 82,000 miles on their e-bikes, and they've reduced the CO2 emissions by about 33,000 kilograms when you compare the comparable travel by car. And I guess for any of you out there that are big fitness buffs, that equates to about 5.25 million calories burned. So it's super awesome program that's just kind of laying some foundation and groundwork there within the city. Additionally, our corporate headquarters, global headquarters is here in Encinitas, and we're implementing a bike share program here. So this would make e-bikes available to everyone to use for short trips around the city and the coastal areas. Again, the outcome of this is really, just all about decreasing CO2 emissions, less traffic congestion around the city, fewer parking hassles, which anyone who knows has been down here in the summertime is an absolute nightmare. And again, just, getting people outdoors and enjoying a little healthier, more active lifestyle. So that's a few things that we have going on here.
Wonderful, thank you. So if nobody wants to add anything to that question, I'll move on to our second question. All right, so this is the High Line in New York City on this slide. And this is an example of an industrial zone that has been transformed into a dynamic public space. Communities of concern often face the worst consequences of climate change. The pandemic exposed deep inequities in San Diego's transportation system that must be addressed. Communities which are economically, socially, and politically disenfranchised are located closer to freeways and industrial infrastructure and suffer poor health as a result. Many residents in these areas rely on public transit, which must be made more convenient, reliable, and connected to all other mobility options. How does your work in mobility prioritize the needs of communities of concern? Alyssa.
Thank you for starting with me. And, I can't profess to even really understand what is needed in all of our communities. But I'm really excited about some of the work that our city has done to move towards more equitable investments and planning in our city. We've done a couple things. We've started an Office of Race and Equity, and that is being put together now, and the recruitments are going on. We have created an equity stakeholder working group, which has been a terrific resource. Again, I think there's a number of the attendees this evening that are part of that working group. We can tap into the resources to maybe get a glimpse at what is needed as we are bringing forward different initiatives or looking at areas of our city. The Equity Stakeholder Working Group in 2019-2020 developed what the city calls the Climate Equity Index. It's comprised of about 41 different factors, including the Cal and Virus screen factors, and it is used to determine where our communities are, our disadvantaged communities are located, and then allows us to use that information in our policy initiatives. So we've been able to integrate that into our CAP update that we're working on presently, our climate resiliency plan, the Complete Communities initiatives that came forward last year that both dealt with housing and mobility. So we had the housing choices and, I'm sorry, housing now, mobility choices. And I would disagree with Pete that it's not all about land use. I think that the solution for mobility starts with mobility, and then you pair the land use better and more focused. So that's my little statement there. But we have been using what has really come out as we overlaid a lot of our equity information through the climate equity index. We also noticed a lot of similarities with policies and practices. So what I mean by that is, for mobility, we know that our VMT efficient areas where we see people that either are driving lesser miles or have the potential to, meaning they could take transit, bike, walk with the right facilities and infrastructure, that those areas greatly align with our communities of concern under the Climate Equity Index. And how terrific is that if we can start to take that information, pivot how we invest in our communities, and really focus on where we need to reinvest into our communities that maybe have been left behind, and to move forward to provide better mobility choices across all those communities.
Thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke a little bit about this Pedal Ahead program, but it's, I think, a really good example of something that's kind of focusing on exactly these challenges. So, like I said, the pilot program is centered in San Diego's District 4, and that encompasses the county's most ethnically diverse cities, right? So most of the participants, a large majority of them, really rely on public transportation, and the program is really focuses on a more sustainable and ecological means, but it also supports this kind of workforce development for underserved communities as well. So it has a whole side of the program that focuses on 18 to 26-year-olds through internship programs and mentorships and educational classes through the community center. And it's partnered with a local shop that we use there as well, Uptown Bicycles, Mesa College, Adams Avenue Business Association, San Diego Workforce Partnership, also the outdoor research as well. So outdoor outreach. So I think it's just an awesome way that you can kind of take a program that's meant to help people move around the city in a better way, but then also add this part of it that is educational and working through underserved cities. We also, on a national level, we work and support organization called Dream Bikes, and that's a non-profit founded by our parent company, Trek Bicycles. So Dream Bikes actually strategically places bicycle stores in low to moderate income neighborhoods, and then provides hands-on training jobs for teens that live in that community. So it's awesome because it works in conjunction with local youth organizations and employs people from the community. It teaches them a skill. And what they really do is they work on refurbishing bicycles. So it's taking, unused materials, refurbishing them and getting them back out into the community for use. So the awesome part about it is, these employees that are there are really gaining some lifelong skills. And, I think the overall effect is it just starts to build up those communities and make them stronger.
Great. And David.
Yeah, I think, with respect to Tailgate, geographically, it sits at the confluence of a few different neighborhoods: Barrio Logan, the East Village, the Ballpark District. Each sort of distinct with respect to the sort of characteristics of its respective neighborhood. And at our firm, we talk a lot about the difference between a campus and a neighborhood. Campuses can be very beautiful, but they're also very closed off and very private and relatively inaccessible. And sort of speaking in terms of the types of projects that we like to develop. neighborhoods, are sort of the opposite. They're inclusive and welcoming and integrated in the sort of context of a larger community. So, I think one of the real opportunities that we have, given, where the site is located, at the confluence of, all these really vibrant and diverse communities, at the end of a, rapidly expanding transit network, is to create a very sort of open and inclusive neighborhood that connects the sort of larger market, larger sort of from a regional perspective, given the transit network, but larger, I think, even as we talk just in the context of downtown San Diego. Our plan, while still being developed, is going to include lots of different types of open space, from recreation centers to plazas to laneways and sort of quiet parks for reading and working. There will be on-site inclusionary housing as part of our larger residential component. At the ground plane, one of the ideas that we are sort of working through and cultivating is partnering with our neighbors to think about developing maker space and community space for the artisans of the Barrio Logan, East Village, ballpark communities. So we think we have a not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to be good stewards of the neighborhood and good partners with all of the neighbors and all the different communities that surround Tailgate Park. I think that that's been one of the things that I think has been a focal point for the Padres, since they moved downtown, is to really be an important stakeholder in the community and be a good neighbor and a good collaborator. And that's the type of ethos that that we intend to sort of carry through the development of Tailgate Park.
Pete.
So I won't take up too much time, since we've got a number of questions to get through. But similar to David's response to us, this is about building a community. So Riverwalk, our project will have one of the largest parks dedicated to the city of San Diego in the last 100 years. A system of bike trails, neighborhood serving retail, grocery stores, gyms, salons, the stuff you do on a daily basis. And of course, jobs. And so having affordable housing in that neighborhood, that's the right place for affordable housing, near jobs, near transit, near parks. The other thing I'll say, because the Highline is here on the screen, is there's a double-edged sword to this conversation. The first is making sure you serve those communities, and the second is making sure you don't displace those communities. And so the Highline is a great example of a community that has thrived because of the infrastructure that has come into it. And it creates a whole different dialogue, a dialogue that is forthcoming in San Diego as we start to have infill communities. And what I love about Riverwalk, one of the things that's you just don't get this opportunity very often. His project is similar, is I'm taking an underutilized 27-hole golf course, 200 acres in the center of the city, displacing 0 people and providing housing for 10,000 residents. I mean, that's just awesome. That's just such a better use of our resources in San Diego. No longer are we throwing water at something for privileged folks who can pay $100 a round. Instead, we're providing housing for everybody.
Great, thank you. Anybody want to add anything to this question? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question. So these are examples of creative solutions to obstacles like bike storage and prioritizing pedestrians over cars on streets in Little Italy. Change is not easy, and even the best initiatives may face opposition or meet unexpected roadblocks. What are potential obstacles in the way of your vision, and how do you plan to address them? What can we as individuals and/or organizations do to help overcome these obstacles? David.
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned, a project of the scale of Tailgate is certainly going to face some set of obstacles. However, I think through our partnership with the Padres, who again highlighted during the last question, have been an important stakeholder in the downtown San Diego market for a number of years now. I think it provides us with an opportunity also to continue to continue to cultivate partnerships in the community. And so our goal all along has been to be a collaborator and a communicator with stakeholders throughout the community, and see how we can address the types of obstacles early on before they become insurmountable. So to date, we have made it a priority to reach out to and communicate with local organizations to make sure everybody's engaged in the discussion. And so groups like the San Diego County Building and Construction Trades Council, the Downtown Partnership, the San Diego Regional EDC, the San Diego Military Advisory Council, and a number of others. Before we even started thinking about, what sort of real estate program was going to be. And actually the Padres started this discussion before Tishman Speyer even got involved. We started having discussions with groups like that just to try to help us sort of shape our vision, and we'll continue to do that. This is a project that's gonna be built in a number of phases over the course of many years, and things may morph and change, and that's gonna that's gonna be a really, I think, fun and dynamic and fluid part of this project. We are hoping to shape our development agreement with the city in a way that provides us with the flexibility to respond to the needs of the market. And so we look forward with continuing to collaborate with not only the groups that I mentioned, but many others. San Diego 350 obviously being one of those groups, to help us really shape our vision over the next couple of years.
Great. Pete.
So I wouldn't be a developer if I didn't say that CEQA is one of the bigger issues, okay? And so I'll just throw it out there. There is a need for CEQA, for those who don't know, is California Environmental Quality Act, and it mandates that any changes to the environment require environmental review. It is a program that is started with the best intentions, and has created some issues for our development community. I think the world is starting to realize this. The city of San Diego has done amazing things to work within the confines of CEQA, and really the benefit there is, or the program there, the strategy there is to update community plans and get through CEQA on a large swath of areas so that each project can come through more efficiently. Why is CEQA an issue? It's because the cost of housing is an issue, right? So how do we get people to change their mode share? How do we get folks to move from the suburbs into somewhere closer to where they live and work, or where they work and shop? You provide a cost competitive solution. We all have options, and so you got to give them an option that is a compelling option. And unfortunately, new development is burdened by carrying the weight of a lot of the new infrastructure that's required for cities as they grow. The cost of affordable housing, and then of course the cost of CEQA and entitlements. And so I think the cost of housing is a big issue, and we as a city are doing a great job of thinking forward and solving that from an entitlement standpoint. The second wave that's coming is figuring out, now we've entitled a bunch of units, how do we build those and not have to charge rents or prices that folks, working families can't afford. And that's a really tough issue. I would say the building code is another area, and this is something that is statewide and not something that we have control over down here in the city or the county even. And that is, we're been blessed by the best climate in the entire world. And so the ability to design to accommodate that climate with operable windows And having fresh air is something that is really difficult to do, believe it or not, in many uses with the building code as it is today. So I think it's a larger discussion, one that'll take a long time, but that's one of the oppositions that stands in the way of creating these types of development. It's just the cost of construction and what that means for the cost of housing.
Great, thank you for sharing. Kevin.
Yeah, well, you heard me talk about it earlier, and that's this whole, bike share programs. And I think that's an awesome way for us to get more people on bikes more often, which is a great thing, not just for people's health, but also for tackling some of these bigger problems. But as I think a lot of people know, a lot of bike share programs have kind of come and gone over the past years. And, in many cases, they've left cities and communities just reeling with bikes littered around sidewalks and parks and blocking storefronts of business owners. So, I think the challenge has been that there's been a lot of bike share companies that have gone out of business as, they're trying to put forward some revenue models that aren't really sustainable. And I think this is making it more challenging for those of us that are committed to supporting communities with an economic and ecologically friendly means of transportation. It turns out that really most of the bike share companies that have kind of come and gone, and I'm sure people have heard names of them or seen them around cities they've been in, really most of that business model has been around capturing and selling consumer data. And not really about, easing the burden of traffic congestion or overloaded parking lots or creating a more sustainable way of getting around town. So the other side to that is none of those companies are in the bike business. So when things like tariffs happen or supply gets tight or manufacturing costs go up, they're just unprepared to deal with the reality of that within their business. So their solution has been close their doors and shutter their business, and it leaves this extra burden for people like ourselves to overcome. We have to overcome that with city officials, with business owners, with community residents, alike. So I think that's a huge challenge, but it also, on the flip side, creates this amazing opportunity for us to educate and show people how well implemented program can use something as simple as the bike to combat these real world issues that are plaguing all cities now, global warming, traffic congestions, et cetera, et cetera. So, our proposed plan with the city of Encinitas is 100% funded by us. And we work in conjunction with the city's climate action plan to get things lined up, not yet implemented, but goes before the city within the next 30 days. So we're hoping for a positive outcome there. So I would say quickly, what can we do to help push these things forward? I'd say first and foremost, make sure that the community leaders are taking an active role in promoting greener, cleaner transportation programs. And secondly, do your homework and make sure you're partnering with the right companies that have the cities and residents' best interest in mind from the get-go.
Alyssa.
So I want to tell you all about the challenges in the city, but it always feels like an excuse. And so maybe let me start with the optimistic piece in the second part of the question, which is what can we as individuals and organizations do to overcome these obstacles? I think there's a lot that we can do. And then I'll go back and I'll talk about the other stuff in just a moment. But when I think about mobility and how to expand mobility, I think it's about all of us that come together and want to talk about these topics to take the step forward to get on a bike or to walk or to make that decision to take transit on a daily basis. Because as we influence the system and the circulation, we can make it easier for others that maybe aren't as comfortable, and to bring those folks along on our journeys of those other modes. So I think that's maybe the easiest thing, but also the hardest thing, because it can be an inconvenience. It can take time. One thing that the pandemic maybe has shown us is that sometimes we have a lot of time. And so anyway, I wanted to maybe start there with the more optimistic, and then I'll get into the more systemic. So one of the other ways to participate is to volunteer on boards. The City of San Diego has a mobility board. There's also, if your interest is around accessibility or ADA, we have an ADA accessibility board. There's a lot of overlap. I actually oversee the ADA team at the city. It was such a great integration in our last organization to put ADA with long range and regional mobility with our curb space and parking, and then have that all come together as we work cross-departmentally with our transportation folks that are managing the roads and the streets and our public spaces. Placemaking is another great way that organizations can work together, work with communities to pair up with those communities of concern that don't maybe have the resources. We have done a lot of work in our community plan updates. Thank you, Pete, for that shout out for our CPUs. And we've really actually since, for the last 7 or 8 years, we've been just going through community plan updates and finding new ways to broaden the mobility choices that can be present as those developments are coming forward in the communities and redevelopments happening. So pairing that, again, that infrastructure for mobility choices with the new development. But what we need is to help our communities along to actually implement that. And sometimes it takes some of you folks that really kind of know how to navigate the cities to be able to explore those possibilities for the communities. Now I'll say what are some of the obstacles. Some of the obstacles are state law. Some of the obstacles are internal processes in a local municipality. So not just the city of San Diego, but I came from the county of San Diego. We had our own layers of process that we needed to navigate through. So those are obvious, but that's why I want to kind of start with how we can empower ourselves and our organizations to do more before I kind of touched on that. But maybe I'll kind of stop there and leave room for some of the questions at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, we can always add more. Does anybody want to add anything else to that question?
I'll just say really, really quickly, I didn't highlight CEQA because in the downtown market, there's a master EIR and our entitlements are covered by the downtown PDO. But CEQA is clearly a huge challenge and impediment to development, not especially, but even development that's transit served. And I personally think, if we really want to promote the utilization of mobility and different types of mobility, then we also need to promote the type of development that is connected to that type of mobility. And as much as it's sort of taboo to say, but to incentivize developers to really focus their efforts in those types of locations that really can be best served by transit and other types of mobility and the best form of mobility is walkability. So I think it's very challenging in lots of places, not just San Diego, that one would think are very obvious in terms of a place that should support density and should get people out of their cars, both sort of from a live, work, and play perspective. But it can be very, very challenging and discouraging for folks like Pete and myself in our firms and firms like ours. So to the extent that you can get out and support those types of individual projects or community plan updates, as Alyssa mentioned, that in my mind would serve to really promote the effort that everybody is sort of connected to today.
Maybe Carla, can I?
Sure, please.
I can't let the CEQA thing go by. So my background is in land use and CEQA, and I strongly believe that there is a time and a place for detailed environmental analysis and disclosure. And what I wholeheartedly agree with Pete and David on is when we can streamline and when there are tools to streamline CEQA, that can really help us to get to the place that I think we're all trying to get to, with focused development, incentivized development in our areas surrounding not just transit with rail, but where buses can come together at more frequent headways, where we have other mobility hubs as we see Sandag developing in their plan. And David, I'll echo, and I wish I had said this, was your participation in projects that do make sense can go a long way, because not many people come out to support a project. They mostly come out against it. And those future residents, they don't live there yet. So they need a voice to make those homes possible.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add something before we move on? No? Okay. So the last question from me, our response to the COVID pandemic has dramatically altered patterns of mobility. These disruptions have opened up possibilities unimagined a short time ago. What changes have you seen that have inspired your vision going forward? Alyssa.
So I've seen on my walks in my community a renaissance of the neighborhood, that smaller area. When we were all jumping in our cars to take kids to soccer and dance and baseball and dogs to the vet or to the dog walking park, we didn't take time to get to know each other in our neighborhoods or to walk to the businesses in our neighborhoods. And one thing that COVID has done and the stay-at-home order has done is reminded us that those neighborhood units, and maybe this goes back to the 15-minute walk at the beginning of the panel, those neighborhoods are so important. And so how can we foster neighborhoods across our town to thrive and be supportive of each other, and to have public spaces reimagined for the residents. So I was lucky enough to spearhead the Slow Streets program for the city of San Diego. And it was not as maybe successful as I think we wanted it to be. We didn't get to the broad expanse of slow streets that some of the other cities did across our nation and even internationally. But we had some examples and we got to try it and we learned, and we still have one in Pacific Beach that is not without controversy. But we are looking, based on that input that we've received, the good and the bad, how can we implement something more permanent? Because isn't that really what that was about? And, you know, I still see kids biking to and from school on that street. I'll see people taking walks or going down to the beaches or the dining establishments. And I think that that's really what we were hoping to do with repurposing the right of way. And that inspires me that we can do this in other places, and the outdoor dining. And there's just so much more of the public space that we can realize, and it doesn't have to be sitting in a car.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
I definitely like the part about not sitting in a car, for sure. So that's, you know, awesome. You know, I'd say, you know, for Electra, you know, it's been a bit of a tailwind with COVID, but the awesome part about that is, you know, in America here, you know, we ride our bikes when we're little kids, and then we ditch them in the garage when we get old enough to get our learner's permit. And that's the last we ever see of them, right? I mean, our parents don't ride bikes. I mean, it's not a family outing. It's just the way it is here. You know, I've had the fortune of living in a lot of places around the world, but did spend, you know, 6 years living in Europe. and a bunch of time in Holland, specifically in Amsterdam and around those parts. And when you visit those areas and you see what they do on a day-to-day basis, you realize, man, we just really missing the boat here on a huge opportunity. And I think, if anything, what's happened with COVID, if people have just said, what can we do to get out and spend time together and breathe some fresh air and whatever. And it's just opened up the minds of Americans, I think, to get back on their bikes, to take walks, to do those things. And even in my own neighborhood, I just see it on a day in, day out basis. And a lot of the reports and studies and surveys that they've been showing on what's happening post-COVID is these things are kind of stuck a bit now. I mean, it's stuck in a good way. Like people have said, like, this is just part of our lifestyle now. So I think this greater conversation we're having here about how to create that infrastructure and use that space in a better way, I mean, for me, is just absolutely awesome. Because I think that, we're getting to this point in time now where in America, we're at our infancy of the understanding of how the bike itself can really be used to do something awesome and to really tackle some of these gigantic problems. So, the question for us, we just have to look at it and say, well, is this a bit of a problem because we don't know how to organize the infrastructure around it, or is this an opportunity for us? And I think from where we sit, we say this is just a massive opportunity moving forward. So yeah, great.
Anybody else? All right, we may have a couple minutes for the Q&A. So I'd like to introduce to you my fellow volunteer, Steve Gelb.
Hi, everyone. We have a question from Craig Jones, which is that he'd like to hear the panelists address the issue of urban sprawl, which is the opposite of what we've all been talking about. With the coming of more electric cars, that might even encourage more urban sprawl. So what can we do to end the urban sprawl that is requiring people to drive such great distances?
I can take a first stab at that. I think this is, really the question, the crux of the question for the Western United States right now is, how do we grow? Do we grow out or do we grow up? One of the things the city of San Diego has done well, and I see Alyssa sitting in one, I guess it's not technically is an ADU or a granny flat, but either way, it's additional density on a site that was probably previously zoned R1, right? Single family residential. So, how do we unwind sprawl? Well, it's really two questions. How do you stop sprawl from happening going forward? In my mind, the most effective way to have that happen is to have the market make it happen, right? And so incentivize development in areas that we want development and disincentivize it in areas that we don't want it, right? And there's a number of ways that can happen. I'll leave Alyssa and the planners to, focus on that. But as an individual, I chose to live in North Park because I don't want to have a 45-minute commute home every day, right? I have a 5-minute commute to and from the office, and some days I bike and I can walk if I get up early enough. And that's really the lifestyle that you can have in an infill environment. So then the question is, that's just new development. What do you do about everything that's been built to date? And I really think that the ADU and the change of zoning for maximizing infill development is a game changer. And so rather than how do we grow to stop sprawl, it's how do we redevelop to stop sprawl? And again, a lot of it comes through zoning. So as zoning changes, as community plans come through and there's additional density proposed in the right locations near transit, near jobs, near amenities, that's one thing this group can be a huge advocate for, is supporting those causes.
Great. Anyone else? Alyssa, I see you unmuted yourself, and then David.
So
I'm sorry. Did I mute you by accident? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I did work at the county for a bit, so I'm familiar with the land use patterns that happen in our unincorporated area. It was a different time then, which is interesting to reflect on. But in the city of San Diego, we've actually taken a lot of effort to incentivize through our zoning, through our community plan updates, and through our initiatives. So an example of that is with our mobility choices, which was the implementation of SB 743, or the VMT threshold for CEQA. So we'll go back to CEQA there for a moment. As we did that effort that was required by state law, we also looked at, okay, so how do we ensure that we are actually achieving a reduction in vehicle miles traveled? And we identified where, again, we had those VMT efficient areas, and we incentivized the opportunity. Land costs in San Diego are so high in our urban areas and our coastal urban areas especially. And so how do we offset that somewhat by allowing density, by providing for infrastructure, or requiring for the provision of infrastructure? So the last thing that we did with that mobility choices is for those projects that are happening in the more northern or less VMT efficient areas of our city, we've identified a fee that would go back to a fund that directly supports active transportation and transit supportive infrastructure in our communities of concern, which are also our VMT efficient areas. So it really incentivizes and it matches money that would be coming in with that in lieu fee, with opportunity now for more development to come back to those communities. And so it's in its infancy, and we'll be watching it and monitoring it, but we're hopeful that that is one of those policies and ordinances that help us move forward with incentivizing infill versus sprawl.
Great, and David.
No, I'm basically just echoing what Pete and Alyssa said. I think it's about incentivizing development in the right areas, and disincentivizing, I guess, is the way to say it. Development in the wrong areas, in suburban areas, in sort of hard to reach areas, and more car dependent neighborhoods. And I think that the VMT construct, it does that. I think a developer, when evaluating a development opportunity, has an acute focus on the math and what are the sort of the inputs and outputs that make the math work or make the math not work. Things like a VMT fee, which can be exacting on in sort of sprawl locations that are not transit proximate, will make development ultimately harder to execute, which should in turn drive more development towards better transit served neighborhoods and locations. So I think it is very much, in my opinion, about the right type of land use in the right type of areas that not only incentivizes developers and development, but just makes the process a little bit more seamless and a little bit more efficient, so that it doesn't take 2, 3, 4 years to get a project approved, and millions and millions and millions of dollars spent on legal fees and consultants to get a project approved, so that there's sort of clear and digestible rules and incentives that the development community understands. I think we've seen that in lots of places. San Diego is certainly one of those cities. LA has pockets of the metro area that are very focused on promoting transit served development, and so the city is seeing lots of new development in lots of those places, Culver City and Hollywood being two of those. So just sort of echoing what Alyssa and Pete had to say.
Great. Well, we're almost out of time, so I think I'm going to return it to B. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Carla. I would like to ask the panelists if we could take a screenshot before we say goodnight. Do we have permission to do that?
Fine by me.
Thumbs up. Marie, are you ready to take the picture, I hope? We'll see. Okay, I'll count to 3.
hold on, give me a second. I'll do the countdown.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
So it'll be 1, 2, 3.
So formal. Wow.
I know. I'm just that kind of a gal. Thank you guys.
Okay, thanks, Marie. So to our panelists, thank you so much for participating tonight. This has been a really great webinar, in my humble opinion. And I hope you've enjoyed the process as well. I'd also like to thank the audience for attending, and a special thank you to my awesome committee for planning this event. So enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody, and hope to be in touch again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank you
great
very
night.
much.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.